Hi, everyone. Welcome to LexCAN's January meeting, which we have turned into an event. I want you to know that we will be recording this session, as is Lex Media, so we'll have two options to see the recording. We were requested by quite a few people to record it because they couldn't attend. So that's very exciting. This is what we're going to concentrate on tonight. A clean energy future depends on fixing the grid. And how do we accomplish this? We're very excited to have Larry Chretien back with us. He's the Executive Director of Green Energy Consumers Alliance. He's spoken with us before about the Inflation Reduction Act and how we can all take advantage of the rebates and the incentives so that we can get around to decarbonizing the entire world. So, oopsie, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to my next slide, which is not happening. Sorry. Okay. For everybody from Lexington, I just wanted to take the opportunity to applaud the town of Lexington, who have accomplished some amazing things in the past few years. We've done it together with the community, with town meeting members, our select board, everybody who is a part of our Lexington government. We passed the specialized stretch building code, which is a great accomplishment. It means everything starting January 1st, 2024 has to go by this specialized stretch code. We are now officially a member of the fossil fuel free pilot community. There are, I think, 7 communities are in. 2 communities are just waiting for their their final details, and then they're going to appoint a 10th community. So we're very excited about this. Starting March 26, 2024, there will be, other than a couple of instances like a hospital, you have to be fossil fuel free. So that is very exciting for Lexington. Now, we've launched the Lex Electrify program to help residents decarbonize, and that how Snoopy feels, that's exactly how I feel. I'm very excited, and we have all of our Lexington people to thank for that. Just want to go through, sorry about this, weird. We have a few events coming up. I was actually asked in a meeting yesterday if this event tonight was like the event that's happening on January 20th. And the January 20th event, we're a partner in it. It's not our event. It's happening in Concord. It's the environmental justice in building our new grid. Where should it all go? We all want a just transition to a new grid. So this will be a conversation about that. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who's speaking, but if you go to the LexCAN website, you can find out all the information on these events. Our next monthly meeting will be on February 13th. And on February 28th, we'll be showing the movie Breaking Boundaries, The Science of Our Planet. It's quite good in terms of where we are in the science on climate change right now, and all the different effects that we're feeling around the world. So now, there we go. I wanted to introduce Larry Chretien again. He's the executive director of the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, a nonprofit serving Massachusetts and Rhode Island. He's also part of the Grid Modernization Advisory Council, and that's an important role. This is one of the roles that is helping to work on this, which is why it's so great that Larry has come here to answer the question, how do we modernize the electric grid to utilize renewable energy like wind and solar? The mission of the Green Energy Consumer Alliance is a nonprofit that harnesses our power as consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. What you're seeing at the top there is what their website looks like. So with that, I want to welcome Larry to come speak to us. I just want to ask people to please put your questions in the chat so that we can try to get to them. I'm sure there will be many, many questions from everybody. We will do the best we can. And we're thinking maybe this is one of a series of topics so that we can actually get to everything. So welcome, Larry, and take it away.
Thank you, Ricky. Thanks everybody for joining me tonight. I love Lexington. I live in Quincy, and Lexington is almost as historic, so it's fun to be with you all. Tonight I'm here to talk about the grid, which we share the grid from Quincy to Lexington and beyond. As Ricky said, we're a nonprofit organization. We just recently updated our mission, and we're empowering consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon future. Just a few changes. We want to emphasize the just transition. We want to emphasize actually going to zero carbon. And we do a lot of work with communities as well as consumers. So tonight, there's some big takeaways from this. I hope you may already get this, but we're going to talk mainly about the distribution system part of the grid, not the transmission so much. In other words, it's what's more under control in Massachusetts cities and towns. If you look in your electricity bill, normally there's a supply section. And so I know you all have, most of you here on this call would be with the Lexington Community Aggregation Program, and that would be featured. But then you have Eversource for your delivery, and there's a few different items in there. The biggest item cost-wise on that part would be the distribution part of your bill, and that's essentially what we're going to be talking about tonight. When we talk about modernizing the grid, we're talking about electrification, and I know that Lexington is really committed to that with your programs. Congratulations, by the way, on being one of the 10 communities that's going to have fossil fuel-free new construction. We appreciate your leadership on that. And it's all about distributed energy resources. By that, what do I mean? Energy resources that are really in your community. It could be solar on the roof or on town hall. It could be heat pumps and EVs, everything except those central power plants that we kind of grew up with. Now we're looking at a much different system. Now, in order to electrify everything, the transportation and home heating and everything else, and adding on so much solar, we're going to have to make major increases in utility capital investment. National Grid and Eversource are going to have to do a lot to upgrade their systems. And with the good news is it's going to create a lot of jobs. It's going to make the grid more resilient. It's going to enable all this distributed energy resources, but it's going to cost money, and we will pay for that on the distribution part of our rate. National Grid's actually, estimating that, their increase in demand by 2050 will be 2.5 times what it is today. Eversource's projection isn't quite as dramatic, but it's up there. So it's going to raise the distribution rate, and it's going to require not just money. What's the money going to go to? It's going to go to substations and things like that, the part of the distribution grid that are within the town of Lexington or the communities around you. They're going to have to site those things. They're going to have to pay for them, and other distribution assets, the poles and the wires and all that. Now, and this is kind of important because our electric rates are already among the highest in the country, both on the supply side and the delivery side. So we want to make sure that we make the best investments, the smart investments. So here's another way to just think about the way the grid works. So on the top left-hand side, you've got some generation from wind or hydro or something else. And the bigger the generation facility, it's going to go in, it's going to produce power at a very high voltage, and it's going to go to what's called a switch yard or a substation. It's going to be transformed, and to move it a long distance, it's going to go at high voltage. Then essentially on those transmission lines, and then it's going to go to a substation more locally in Lexington, that's going to have transformers that it's going to bring the voltage down a bit, so that it can then go into the distribution lines. And those distribution lines that you see in Lexington, the ones outside your house, they're carrying a voltage that's much lower than what would be coming from a big power plant. And so the interesting thing about the distribution system is it's got to be, smart. It's got to bring the voltage up or down as needed. If you look at a lot of the poles on your block, you're going to see at least one or two items called a transformer. It looks kind of like a garbage can way up top at the pole. And that's going to go to feed the home customer. So here's another look. This is, I pulled this out of the National Grid plan that we'll talk about in a minute. At the top side, it kind of looks very simple, right? We used to have Eversource's predecessor company they would own the generation assets. There wasn't a lot of wind and solar, but then they would put it through the transmission line and so forth, distribution to your home. That's kind of like the slide I just showed you. Tomorrow's grid is going to look a lot different. It's going to be far more decentralized. It's going to have more things going on with it. It's busy, but this is what we're asking for. This is what it's going to take to get to zero emission. So we're going to have more sources coming from different directions. Wind, solar, hydro. The hydro might come from Canada. That will require a transmission investment. The offshore wind that we want to see is going to require a transmission investment. Those will be on the transmission side, no question about that. But the dark gray area is really what's all at stake here with Eversource in your community. It's going to have substations in your town that are hopefully going to be hardened, is the term. We want to make them more resilient because climate change is actually causing aggravation to, it's ironic, isn't it? The climate change, the heat and the fluctuations cause strain on the distribution system, on the wires, on the substations and so forth. So we need to make them stronger. Hurricanes or heavy storms, all that causes, it's going to cause an expense. Now, but we're going to digitize them far more than ever. They're going to be smarter. There's going to be a lot of two-way communication between consumers and the utility. The utility is going to be able to have sensors and measure exactly what's going on all over the place. And so if the power goes down in one part of town, they'll probably be able to fix it faster than they were, years ago. And so they want to automate the distribution, as I said. But now we're going to have a whole bunch of new things. We're going to have battery storage. It wasn't long ago that it was said that, you could store oil in a tank. You could store gas in a pipeline. You could store coal in a pile, but you couldn't store electricity, they were saying. Well, that's changed. Now you see lithium-ion batteries and many other storage technologies have come down in price. They've gotten more reliable. And so now we can store power when it's cheap and plentiful, and we can hold it, and we can put it back into the grid when maybe the sources of power that we want to see aren't quite there, the wind and the solar, which are intermittent. Or we might be able to put the power into the grid when it's very expensive. We certainly would like to put cheaper wind and solar power onto the grid at a time when expensive fossil fuel power is the alternative. And we want to put those natural gas peaker plants out of business is one objective here. So the battery storage is now a thing that the grid has to figure out how to do. If it's in like a few years, it's in 20% of the homes in Lexington, each time it's going to be like having to manage that two-way flow of power between the utility and your home. It's complicated, in other words. We're making their job harder. Then electric vehicles are plugging in. Eventually we need to have, by 2035, 100% of the cars in Massachusetts, new cars will have to be electric. It's kind of timed important to that because by 2050, we really do not want any gasoline-powered cars. What that means is if you're going to have a car in Lexington by 2050, it's going to be something that has to plug in. So that's complicated. That's every home in Lexington, right? And so now it's another two-way flow of electricity. it has some benefits we're going to get to in a minute, which is we can charge the car when wind and solar power are plentiful, and we can actually discharge the from the battery of the car just as if it was stationary storage. My car is sitting in the driveway 23 hours a day practically, right? So there's opportunities there. Now, heat pumps, again, we have to stop burning fossil fuels to keep ourselves warm. And so we're going to heat pumps. Lexington's going to be a leader. You're going to have, pretty soon you won't be able to build anything new with fossil fuels. And so there's going to be, and you've got this program I see to electrify, Lex Electrify, I think is what it's called. You're going to have that going. And so you're going to have more heat pumps in Lexington pretty quickly. And so that's another new source of power that's going to be drawing from the grid. So in the winter by 2033-ish, we're actually going to have the demand from in the winter is going to be higher than the demand in the summer in Lexington or in Massachusetts. And, that'll be the first time ever. Typically, we've been what's called a summer peaking part of the country. So then there's demand response. There's ways that the utility can call upon us and maybe tell us, don't charge your car right now because it's 95 degrees out and we got power plants blaring away to try to keep up with demand. And we just don't want to have to, use more power than we need to. Or, there's multiple other ways. They might encourage a big business to curtail for an hour. They might ask you to turn your air conditioner down a couple degrees. That's called demand response, where the program's involving utilities. So there's a whole lot of opportunities there. But as you can just tell by the graph and sort of by the way I said it, it's going to be more complicated. It's going to involve, it's not going to be a spectator sport. We're not going to be sitting back and watching. It's going to be involving us. So one of the questions that you all asked me to try to bring some answers to, who decides what's going to happen with all of this? And, is it the utilities? Is it the DPU? Who is it? Well, so here's the story. In Massachusetts, investor-owned utilities were given a monopoly. We don't want to have 10 companies running power lines through Lexington, right? So there's one, and it's for better or worse, it's Eversource. And they are regulated, heavily regulated by the state of Massachusetts. And so, in particular, the agency responsible is the Massachusetts Department of Utilities, Department of Public Utilities, DPU. And they are it's run by 3 commissioners appointed by the governor. In order for something to happen at the DPU, they need at least 2 votes of the 3 commissioners to go forward. And they have jurisdiction over the rates that you pay. And here's what's really, really important. They approve or deny utility capital and operating expenses. And so I want you to think a little bit like the way the state does the budget or the way your town does the budget. There's some body that decides how much you're going to spend on schools and how much you're going to spend on fire and all this sort of stuff. Well, the DPU is going to determine how much spending the utility can do, Eversource can do. They also, what's very critical, I know this is another matter of interest, they set policy on interconnection. When we want to interconnect solar panels or when we want to interconnect storage, those kinds of things, it's the DPU that sort of lays down the law as to how the utility is going to have to work with the consumers who want to do that. Now, to a much lesser extent than the DPU, there's the Massachusetts Energy Efficiency Advisory Council. They advise the utilities and the DPU on how to run the Mass Save program. That's pretty important in this whole thing. I used to be on that, and I am not now. What I am on now is a thing called the Grid Modernization Advisory Council. That was established by the 2022 climate bill, basically because the legislature and Governor Healy wanted to establish, wanted to have another body that helped the utilities and the DPU figure out how to modernize the grid. So we are purely advisory, just like the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, purely advisory. One way to put it is, well, like a cowboy with a big hat but no cattle. So we can say that we would like the utilities to do certain things in terms of grid modernization, and they can ignore us. The DPU can ignore us, but hopefully we have. I'll get into this a little bit more. Um, we've made some points that are worth considering. There are two other bodies that are not either that is somewhat advisory more than decision making. That's pretty relevant. Governor Healy established a commission on siting, and they're primarily about trying to figure out how do we site renewable energy facilities and grid modernization facilities, things like substations. And they'll be working for several months. And the legislature is looking at a couple of different bills that would change the way that siting decisions are made by an agency called the Energy Facilities Siting Board that has jurisdiction over fossil fuel power plants, which we're not going to see anymore, solar, wind, substations. Those are the things. So the Energy Facility Siting Board is a big deal now. There's also a commission on transmission that is working, trying to make recommendations. All those recommendations on siting and transmission are going to go to the legislature and to the governor. And we'll talk more about the next few months. So what are the barriers to the grid accommodating distributed renewable energy such as wind and solar? I would say this, the wind we're going to see serving Massachusetts is in the future is going to be offshore wind. It's almost impossible to get permission to build an onshore wind turbine in Massachusetts. The NIMBYs just won't have it, right? So we're going to build them offshore, and that's a great resource. We're blessed to have it. That's mostly about transmission, not distribution. It's not the big noise, the big work it's going to take to try to figure out how to get the power from Vineyard Wind and other places to the mainland. It's got a transmission issue. Then once it gets onto the grid, there is some work on distribution, but the biggest challenge is transmission. Interconnection is absolutely a major problem. That is where the distribution system, there are transformers at substations and those ones outside your house that might not be large enough to accommodate the increased generation at a specific location. Location, in real estate they say location, location, location. It's the same thing in the grid. There might be a part of Lexington where it's okay to add more solar or heat pumps or storage or EVs, but then there might be another part of the grid in Lexington where it's at capacity, and the only way to add more of these distributed energy resources is for Eversource to upgrade to build a new larger capacity substation or feeder, as they call it. And so there's a lot of work to do in that way. So interconnection is holding up a whole bunch of solar projects that have been developers are trying to get built in Massachusetts. There's a backlog that's just horrible. Some developers have been waiting for over a year. If you want to put solar on your home and it's under 10 kilowatts, you have to get an interconnection approval from Eversource. That's easy to get. But if you want to build, say, a 100 kilowatt project on a public building, for example, that's going to require, Eversource is going to say, well, we got to study whether or not we've got the capacity to handle that right now. And so then they study it for a long time, and that's a problem. But then they come sometimes at the end of the day, they'll come back and say, well, guess what? You can build, except you've got to pay X number of dollars so that we can upgrade the system to accommodate you. So right now there is a docket at the Department of Public Utilities that would sort of reset the rules a little bit. This is a major, major issue. There's another issue called the duck curve. It's kind of fun. I'll show you. Here's an example of the duck curve. This is New England on April 9th, 2023. The top line, it's solid until about 6:30 in the morning. That's the amount of power needed to service New England. Then the dotted line is how much power we all consumed in New England over time. As you can see, it built up. We used more at about 12:30 was sort of the peak. And then it dipped a little bit as it got a little bit milder. Then it goes back up around 8:30 at night because we all went home and we turned on the lights, right? So that's a normal kind of fluctuation over the course of a day. But look at the big yellow thing. That's the belly of the duck. That is the amount of power that was produced, what we call behind the meter. That's basically rooftop solar, like we have all over homes and some businesses and whatnot. That reduces the demand that we need from to be served by other kinds of power plants, particularly fossil fuels. So the great news, that's a huge reduction. We went from 12,000 megawatts at the top down to 7,000 megawatts at about 3:30, 4 o'clock. That difference of 5,000 megawatts is basically putting natural gas out of business for a few hours. That's a wonderful thing, right? So we like that. But if you can imagine, this is the shape of the duck. So got the tail of the duck, and then we got the big belly of the duck. And what's important for you to know is the belly wasn't as fat 5 years ago. It didn't come down as much. And every year we just keep building more and more solar, and the belly gets fatter and gets closer to zero. In Southern Australia, it goes to zero sometimes. In California, in some places, it's getting there. Now, that's a wonderful. Now, this is New England. Massachusetts, 2/3 of the solar in New England is from Massachusetts. So, if we had I don't have a Massachusetts version of this, but in Massachusetts, we have a fatter duck. Right. So that's an issue for Eversource. Now, why is that? The lower the belly of the duck gets, the steeper the curve all the way up to where the head of the duck is. So by 8:30 at night, we've got the head of the duck. The steeper that is, the more of a challenge it is for the grid to accommodate the change that we're all causing. So we want the solar power, but we don't want to have to turn on fossil fuel power plants all of a sudden, because it's a sudden reduction in solar power. And so we've got to think ahead about how we're going to do something about the head of the duck. We want to bring everything down. So one of the questions I was asked was, what role do the utilities play in addressing these barriers? Well, as I said, the 2022 law said that the legislature established the Grid Mod Advisory Council that I'm on, and they required the 3 investor-owned utilities in Massachusetts: Eversource, that serves Lexington; National Grid, which serves different parts of Massachusetts, including Quincy, where I live, and it serves Unitil, which is the Fitchburg area. And Unitil is by far smaller than Eversource and National Grid. And they were told to write electric sector modernization plans, ESMPs. And they were told to present those draft plans to the GMAC, is what we call ourselves, the Grid Mod Advisory Council. And they gave us a draft a few months ago. It took a lot of work, and we reviewed them. We asked a million questions, and there's a lot of really smart people, engineers and all kinds of cool people on the Grid Mod Advisory Council that I enjoyed working with and learning from. And together we submitted our observations to the DPU. And now the utilities will formally package up their plans, send them to the DPU on January 29th in a couple of weeks, and they will look at hopefully the DPU will read our observations along with the plans. And by August of 29th, several month process, the DPU must approve or deny, approve with modification or reject the filings. So it's like the state budget almost. It's like a lot of scrutiny. They're gonna and we'll get to it in a minute. There's opportunities for some public involvement in that. So I can send these slides. Well, actually, I already have. Ricky, you can send these to anybody you want. You can put it on your website. They can click. We have a website for the GMAC that people can look at. So the dockets, what they're called, they're dockets at the Department of Public Utilities. DPU docket 24-10 is the one for Eversource. And you can look at that and see what's in it. There's then National Grid has a docket, Unitil has a docket. And what's interesting here is we'll get to the process a little bit more, but if it's not me asking questions during the proceeding or you, the DPU is going to ask 1 million questions of the utilities. Why are you proposing this? Have you thought about that? The Attorney General's office will be heavily engaged. I know that the Department of Energy Resources will be heavily engaged. We've really enjoyed working with the Governor Healy's Department of Energy Resources. They are really on top of this, and they did a great job working with us on the council. And I know they're going to be really working towards the goals that we all have set in Massachusetts and making. So this 2024 is going to be really interesting in a very nerdy, geeky kind of way. And so then if you want to look at the observations and recommendations of the Grid Mod Advisory Council, it's on the website right there. You'll have the opportunity to look at that. I will say this, in some fairness to the utilities, the Grid Mod Advisory Council didn't get going until March. And by law, the electric sector modernization plans require a lot of information, and the utilities really didn't have time to do what we would consider to be a complete job. So we have a lot of our recommendations. If you read, we're suggesting to the DPU that they ask the utilities for more information. There's still more time. So if they didn't have the information for the Grid Mod Advisory Council on November 20th, when we voted on this thing, then they should have more time, right? It's now, they've got a few more months. And so they know what we all are asking for. And so hopefully they will keep at it. And certainly by August, we're hoping that the DPU will have enough information to make good decisions. For example, we don't know how much this is going to cost us. That wasn't calculated. And we don't know how much it's going to affect, say, low income people, or, we know we need to make these investments. This is what's critical. Otherwise, we can't get to net zero. But, if we raise the electricity rate too much, that makes it kind of hard to encourage people to buy electric cars and heat pumps. So it's sort of a balance we have to make. We have to say yes to the right investments, and we have to really maybe say no to some. Another question I was asked was, are the electric utilities properly incentivized to promote renewable energy? Are they incentivized properly for offshore wind and hydro? Yes, I would say that they are. The utilities are not a barrier in that respect. Basically, because the law says that the utilities have to buy Hydro-Quebec, or they have to buy offshore wind, and that's there are some hiccups along the way to our future in hydro and offshore wind, but it's not really, can't really blame so much on the utilities. Okay, it's more. Here's a fun fact: law requires Massachusetts to buy a lot of hydro from Quebec. It would actually be 20% of the usage of electricity in Massachusetts right now, a big chunk. That's been held up because the state of Maine did not want the transmission lines to run through Maine to bring the power from Canada to Massachusetts. So, but to answer the question, are the utilities incentivized? Offshore wind, yes. Solar, I would say no. This gets back to that interconnection problem I'm talking about. We've got to figure out how to get the utilities to process those interconnection requests much faster. I think what is a related question to the question I was asked was, do we really want the utilities to promote renewable energy? I think it's not their job to promote them. It's their job to accommodate them, is the way I would put it. I think it's public policy is really not their job. Public policy is the job of the governor, the legislature, other elected officials, and it's a place for people like us to get involved. What role does energy storage play? It's key to balancing the grid out. Well, there will be times when generation would otherwise exceed demand. And we can use batteries to store some of that power and use it for a time when the grid is stressed out. Resilience, as climate change and extreme weather events make the grid less stable, we want to have perhaps backup power at our home or at schools, maybe microgrids, things like that. And so it'll become increasingly important. I would say sometimes society, we're making a lot of mistakes. I think it sometimes can get us despondent, but sometimes it seems like some things have turned out technologically just in time. The tools are here, they're in front of us. We didn't have storage as an opportunity 5-10 years ago in any real meaningful sense, but we can look with some optimism that it can play a big role between now and 2050. Here's a fun fact, another reason why storage comes into play. About 40% of electricity costs, when you look at your bill over the course of a year, are driven by about 10% of the hours. A few hours in the winter when demand is crazy cold, and a few hours in the summer when demand is high because it's crazy hot. And so when it's particularly when it's crazy hot, what happens is we turn on fossil fuel plants and we pay whatever the market bears, whatever it takes to get them to put on more natural gas or oil. It's expensive, it's dirty, it contributes to huge public health problems. But again, that's what's driving up our electricity bills over the course of a year. Storage can help by doing that. It can help us reduce the amount of hours that we run fossil fuels on. I will say this, when we talk about storage, a lot of people think about stationary storage. Tesla has a product called Powerwalls that some people might have that you might know. There are other competitors to Powerwall, which is it's a battery. You know, it looks like it's not as big as a refrigerator. It mounts against the wall, and it looks like a refrigerated door. Perhaps it gives you about 10 kilowatt hours of power, I believe. And they're a little bit expensive, but a lot of people like them. It's better than having a fossil fuel generator as backup in your home. But electric vehicles, I think, need to be appreciated more than they are right now as a storage asset relative to stationary storage. So you're going to see over more and more cars that have bidirectional charging. But the Ford F-150 has an option where you can have bidirectional charging. The Chevy is going to come out with some devices. Hyundai has them. The Nissan Leaf has it. You're going to see, I think within a few years, almost every new electric car will have bidirectional charging. And so you can look to that as a way to have backup power when you need it. And you might get, Eversource might call you. They might call you some days and say, please don't charge your car because it's too hot and we don't want you to require more electricity that would be fossil fuels, right? And there might be days when they say, could you discharge your battery to help us out? And that's the kind of thing that can make the electric car, quite frankly, a better proposition for you, more affordable, because the utility's it's going to be an asset to the grid. I'm chomping at the bit. I've got a couple staff people who are studying what we can do to sort of make this happen. So to me, the point is, stationary storage doesn't take you anywhere, right? You need to buy a car anyway, so why not turn it into a device like stationary storage? So you're getting two benefits with one product. One of the questions I had was, what are the siting issues? Well, in Massachusetts, it's very hard to cite almost anything, right? It's hard to cite housing. It's hard to cite, lots of things. With energy, it's hard to cite new solar and wind generation. It's hard to cite big storage projects. I'm not talking about a power wall. I'm talking about, what if somebody came to Lexington and they said they wanted to build a $10 million battery and they, want to cite it. The permitting question of that would be a big deal. would people in town want something, a big lithium ion battery that could serve a lot of great economic needs? It could help us get to our goals, but maybe people don't want to live next to such a big battery. So the siting commission is going to look at that. It's going to look at the transmission and distribution infrastructure. And they have a large group of good stakeholders working on this. And they're going to spend the next several months trying to hash out recommendations that will go to the governor, to the legislature, and to that energy facility siting board that I mentioned that ultimately makes decisions. This may change the law. There are bills in the legislature about changing how the energy facility siting board should look at projects, and maybe make it a little. There are some people who want to make it easier to build the new solar and wind. Then there are other people who are concerned about, we don't want to site solar and wind where it might require the clearing of a lot of trees. There might be people who don't want to force a substation on an environmental justice community. And that's what this commission's kind of going to study for the next several months. There are bills in the legislature that would come at the issue of siting a little differently, in different ways. And my gut is that there will be changed in law, but I think that the commission will be asked to come out with its report before the law is changed. Otherwise, why do the commission, and why pass a law before the commission's done? So I think before the end of the summer, we'll see something more on that. One big question, how do we make a difference in speeding the progress for our clean energy future? Well, I know you all do this, but continue letting the governor and legislators know that you are concerned. In 2021 and 2022, the legislature passed major climate bills. Your state senator, Mike Barrett, is a huge part of all this. They didn't pass one in 2023. It's not often that states do these kinds of things every year, but there's a lot of pressure on the legislature to produce another big climate bill. So we're expecting another one before the end of the legislative session, which ends at the end of July. And so rumor has it that the House and the Senate will each put out a climate bill, and that they will then run it through their process and pass it in the House and the Senate. And then they will join together in what's called a conference committee that will work for some time. And hopefully by the end of July, we will have a third climate bill in 4 years that will address a lot of the issues that we're all concerned about. Now, that is on the legislative side. Not everything requires a bill. Sometimes it just requires the executive branch to do something. So I should have been more complete on this slide, but the Mass Department of Public Utilities is going to make important decisions every year on utility programs and spending. And so for the rest of our lives, it's that in order to upgrade the grid, the electric vehicles, the heat pumps, the solar, it's not all going to happen in one night. People are going to, it's going to develop over time, more and more gradually. No doubt about that. And so every year, the utilities are going to be going to the DPU for permission to spend more. And so the DPU is going to have to look at the pros and cons of their proposals and make decisions. Now, the way it works is there are always public comment periods that you can participate in. You kind of have to know about them. And so, we'll do our best at Green Energy Consumers Alliance to let people know. But for the most part, over the last many, many years, the average person doesn't get involved at this level. This is really very wonky, and it can be difficult stuff. But it's you can do it. So this is something that you all might want to pay some attention. Some of you might want to pay attention to. Now, you can support organizations that will intervene, that work in the public interest. And so just three that come to mind are my organization, the Acadia Center, and the Conservation Law Foundation. I'm already talking to those groups. We're going to kind of collaborate and on the grid modernization dockets that I just talked about. But And so this is about grid modernization. You know, there's also the Department of Environmental Protection is having processes they're developing. They're trying to move forward on a clean heat standard, a big deal. That's a regulatory thing. That's not legislative, that's executive branch. The Mass DEP is also looking to change a thing called the Clean Energy Standard, and I'll have a blog up about that tomorrow, I think. And there's an opportunity for public comment very soon on that. I think Thursday, there's a public comment period that you can observe, and comments are due by January 19th. Won't be your last opportunity, but that's coming up. Big new policies that are in the executive branch. So here's a slide. The Clean Energy Standard. They have it's not a draft regulation. It's what they call a discussion document. It's only 4 pages. You might find it interesting. You can find it through this website, and they're taking comments on January 19th. But you can go to a stakeholder sessions and learn more. This is I'll give you the spoiler alert. They're proposing a thing that it's going to make the clean energy standard stronger and better. It's going to add more renewable energy to the grid faster than what we have right now. It's a good thing. So there's an opportunity. You don't need to become an expert. If you told the DEP, you have a good idea here, run with it. We need more renewable energy. That will help. Here's an example of where we are with the clean energy standard now. The left-hand bar is a breakout of where we're getting our sources of clean energy now. So as you can see, we get up to about 40% with relatively environmentally benign sources of energy, which means 60% is fossil fuel, right? So you might have disagreements about whether or not to include nuclear power, but it's zero emission. Over time, the standard is going to be what you see above. It gets to 80% by 2030. And, you know, I don't know if we have a law in Massachusetts says that we have to reduce statewide emissions 50% by 2030. And I think the easiest way to get there is to make that clean energy standard 100% by 2030. Basically, all we have to do is tell the utilities to buy more clean energy. So that is the proposal of the Mass DEP right now. Doesn't go to 100% by 2030, but it's an improvement. It would make these bars you're seeing here at least 5% faster, you know, in each year, starting maybe next year. So that's a faster improvement. That's how we get to our goals faster. We need to get to 100% clean energy, you know, again, as soon as we can. We can't wait to 2050 to do that. Our organization does a lot of different events like this one but we do a lot of webinars that you can sign up for. When the weather gets better, we do a lot of things outside where you can test drive an EV or visit a wind turbine or solar farm, things like that. If you go to our events page, you can see that. And if you're interested in the blogs that we write, you can go to our blogs page, read the blogs, then you can subscribe to the blog. And every time we do a blog, you'll get it in your email box. So if you subscribe tonight, you'll get my the blog I write about the clean energy standard tomorrow. So you can see examples of our upcoming events. Lastly, we are a nonprofit organization that appreciates donations. If you're so kind, go to greenenergyconsumers.org, donate. And that's it. I can answer any questions. If you disagree with something, go right ahead.
So we have a few questions in the chat. We also have questions that were sent in beforehand, and I'm going to try to go back and forth. Charlie, your hand is raised. We're taking questions in the chat. Did you have something besides a question? Okay. So actually the first question we had came from two people, and you addressed it when you said that in 2033, we're going to be crossing the threshold going from a summer peak to a winter peak. So the question then that follows, since will there be enough power transmission and distribution line capacity to deliver the load in the winter?
This shows you the importance of offshore wind. Um, uh, Obviously, solar does really well in the spring and summer, right, in the fall. The profile of wind production, particularly for offshore wind, it really produces at a high, what we call a capacity factor in December, January, February, and March. Though particularly January, February, March, those 3 months, they probably produce half the power that they're going to produce in the course of a year, much more than August. Okay, so if you like heat pumps, then you should love offshore wind, because that's the power that we're going to use to run the heat pumps in the future. You love solar, but you know what? There'll be a lot of days when it's not really there for you. It's certainly not going to be running at night when you're cold. So we need it's peanut butter and jelly, offshore wind and heat pumps. And I will add all these projections about future demand. We have something to do about it. I mean, we don't just add heat pumps and EVs. We got to figure out how to manage our load as much as possible. In the winter, maybe again, it's more important when I'm charging my car. Maybe we don't want to have people charging their EVs at the same time that heat pumps are running the hardest, right? So, but it's so easy to schedule when you're charging your EV. It's ridiculously easy. So we need to have the incentives in place. And we just need more energy efficiency, right? If we can otherwise have an energy efficient home, adding the heat pumps isn't going to won't be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Okay. Here are a couple of questions that kind of go together. So I'm going to give you both questions at the same time, because it has to do with these batteries that we all may be getting or using our cars as batteries. Is bidirectional charging legal in Massachusetts? I assume it is, because you said that some cars can do it, but is that legal? And then how many batteries are we all going to need until we're considering that we're using virtual power plants?
Yeah, so virtual power plants is a buzzword now, but it's a really cool thing. A virtual power plant is all these distributed energy resources being networked, and the Eversource can look to all the different EVs and storage units in electric storage projects in Lexington, and call upon them as if they were a power plant. And we don't necessarily need them all to discharge at the same time or to charge at the same time. But once we have 5.5 million cars in Massachusetts right now. In 2050, they're all going to be electric. That's an incredible amount of power that we can have. Bidirectional charging can put some of that power back into the grid when we need it, using demand response and in virtual power plants. And so we can gradually be doing this. So the answer to the question, is it legal? Yes, it is. I do think we need to work on the interconnection standards for that, just like we do for solar. It's very similar. And we want to make it as easy and as get the utilities and get the local inspectors comfortable with it. So we really also want the DPU to create incentives for it. But yeah, there are people I know who have, I have a friend who's got a Ford F-150 who went through the process, and they have bidirectional charging, for example.
A follow-up to the big battery storage units. You use the word NIMBY and as a problem, and I'd like to propose that we all become YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. But is there a problem with living near a substation or a big battery storage unit, or is that in our heads?
Uh, I want to be honest with you and say, I'm trying to get more information about what it's like to be so adjacent to a substation. I'm within walking distance of a couple substations in Quincy. They're kind of covered with, there's trees bordering them, they're kind of out of the way. You don't even think about them. But I know, for example, that Eversource, got approval to put one in East Boston, over the objections of the community. And there was concerns in that community about it was going to use space that could have been open space. It was going to be a threat for flooding. It was in on the Chelsea East Boston line. And we certainly don't want to have a substation that's going to get flooded out. There's some dispute about whether or not that would be a problem. Is it a fire hazard? And so I don't know enough about that case in East Boston, to be honest with you, but that is now, and I don't have the numbers off handy, but we're going to have to like double the number of substations in Massachusetts in the next so many years. And so we've got to figure out, and so it's an interesting environmental justice issue. We don't want to force a substation on a community. On the other hand, if we want that community to have access to heat pumps and EVs and solar, we need to have the substation that does the job. So it's going to probably be very location based, which and really the utility working with the community and trying to have it be done in harmony.
So I'm going to read this one because it has to do with whether, as we green our energy sources, do we have the possibility of being able to lower our electricity costs?
I see over the next 20 years, there's factors pushing in both directions. And as I have a master's in economics, and I've been thinking about this thing for 40 years, and I don't think anybody really knows right now. I'm kind of hoping all the low cost factors are gonna win out, but there's technology is generally working in the right direction. The cost of running cost of building wind power, of solar power, has gone down dramatically, and it probably will over time. The last year was not kind to offshore wind. The developers who are proposing projects in Massachusetts and Rhode Island came in with pretty high prices that the state did not want to accept. So I'm optimistic that the next time we put offshore wind out to bid, it'll come in at a good price. And so I think perhaps it was a transitory situation having to do with supply chain problems, goes back to COVID and other things. And I'm just hoping that when things settle down a little bit more, interest rates have a big impact on the upfront cost of things, and wind and solar and substations. All those things are capital expenses that depend a lot on interest rates, can affect them a lot. So again, the lithium ion batteries that work in cars and homes, those costs have come down dramatically, incredibly fast. So there's a lot of good things that are happening, no question about that. But then there are other factors that might drive the cost up. I think if Eastern Massachusetts is expensive for anything. You want to buy a cup of coffee. You want to get breakfast. In Eastern Massachusetts, it's more expensive than breakfast in Western Massachusetts. We live in an expensive place.
I just stopped your sharing because
Yeah.
since we're not using the slideshow, so everybody
Yep.
can see each other.
Yep.
We've got a couple of questions about the role of ISO New England and the role of FERC, DOE. There was another group that somebody mentioned, the Northeast Collaborative for Interregional Transmission. These are all other organizations that I assume are pieces of the puzzle. Who
Yeah, we are in Massachusetts. We're one of 6 New England states that's part of the New England Power Pool. So we're working with all the other states, and it's meant to be picture a bathtub with 6 faucets and 6 drains coming out of it. We're all part of one pool, and so that's run by an organization called the Independent System Operator of New England, and so they have a lot to say about transmission in New England. Now, if it comes from Canada or New York, then you get other jurisdictions engaged, and that's why we have a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. A lot of the rules having to do with wholesale energy is set by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So there is a lot involving going beyond Massachusetts DPU. ISO New England is very important. They're not as ISO New England is kind of a problem. They're not as progressive as they should be in terms of supporting green energy or environmental justice. We got to keep pulling them into this century. But our organization doesn't get too involved, honestly, with ISO New England or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We kind of focus on the state.
There's a question here regarding time of use charges, which I know I think the Shave the Peak program was intended to try to push that as a possibility. Is that going anywhere?
We're pretty optimistic that, well, first of all, the legislature passed a bill that requires the utilities to propose time of use rates for that would serve electric vehicle charging. And that's a docket that's going to happen. We're going to intervene in that docket. And that's what the legislature wanted to focus on, EV time of use. But at the same time, now a lot of people believe that changing our electricity rate to what's called the time of use rate, it makes sense for the entire house or the entire business, not just EVs. So right now, for example, you and I, we pay the same rate per kilowatt hour for our electricity, regardless of when we use it in a 6-month period. It changes, Eversource's rates change every 6 months, or, in an aggregation, it might be a 3-year contract. But we know for a fact that it costs the system a lot more money at some hours than other hours. And so we want to encourage, so our organization's an advocate for time of use pricing, which is you send signals to consumers, quite frankly, to use less power when it's expensive for the system, and you can use more power when it's not a big strain on the system. Very happy to see that Governor Healy's people is very much in favor of time of use pricing. So I think that you're going to see eventually the Department of Public Utilities will make that happen. A lot. Now, what I didn't get into, another big aspect of grid modernization, is what really enables this is advanced metering infrastructure. Like right now, the meters we have aren't quite exactly what we need to go as far as we want with time of use pricing. But within about 3 or 4 years, you'll have a meter that will be able to tell Eversource how much power you're using on a 15-minute basis. So that will help set up a better schedule for time of use pricing when that. So they need to install a new meter at your house to have that.
Mm-hmm. But it seems like that would certainly help the grid and our pocketbooks.
And that's actually the point where I don't think we necessarily have to accept the fact that demand is going to increase by 2 or 3 times between now and 2050. Like, the time of use policy is a tool that we've never had before. So I hope it may work great. I believe it will. So bidirectional charging, all these different things. So we don't just have to sit and just keep paying for new substations all the time.
We have a question on nuclear energy, and specifically not the old type of nuclear energy, but fission. No, I'm sorry. I'm getting myself confused. Fusion. Is that, I know there's very little research being done in this country compared to other countries, but do you see a future for that kind of technology?
I personally do not think that they'll ever be able to build a nuclear power plant to serve Massachusetts that would provide power cheaper than renewable energy.
Okay. We got one. I don't know how you're going to answer this question, but it's a simple question. Is the grid broken?
Uh, I think it's a marvel in some ways. It's the largest. Some people have said it's the largest machine in the world, right? And it's incredible. It's a network that's, you know, it's more physical than the internet, but it's that kind of thing, right? Which it's there. Compared to the rest of the world, I'm sure there are countries that have maybe a more efficient grid. But by and large, my power stays on most of the time. I can't really complain when I look around the world. I think we're kind of blessed to live here. But can it be improved? Absolutely. I mean, the more you look into this kind of stuff, that there's room for improvement. And so is it broken? Parts of it, yeah. But overall, is the whole thing broken? No. But it certainly needs to be modernized. I think that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah. Here are two other technologies that came up in a couple of questions. Green hydrogen, which feels a little mythical. But I know people are talking about it and I know people are working on it. Same with carbon capture. This has been an idea for many, many, many years, and nobody's been able to do it in a financially responsible way. And of course, we don't want people or plants saying, oh, now we have carbon capture, let's keep burning fossil fuel. So that is a real problem to me with carbon capture. However, if we're getting anywhere on that, it could help move us along more quickly. So do you have an opinion on either of those technologies?
First, carbon capture, it's not going to move us along quickly. If it ever happens, it's going to be a long time from now. And I think by the time that technology is ever developed at any reasonable point, we will have eliminated the need for it because we've figured out how to green the grid, without fossil fuels. And so I think it's money poorly spent if the federal government subsidizes carbon capture. And it's sort of just another thing that the fossil fuel industry is doing to sort of buy time for them. It's kind of like menthol cigarettes, if you want to, that sort of thing. And then the other issue what you asked about was green hydrogen. Hydrogen is not an energy source really by itself. It's a way to store energy. We don't go out. There's no place where we can. It's not naturally occurring hydrogen. We can make it essentially by splitting water, which is H2O, pretty obviously, right? And so we use a thing called an electrolyzer that can split the hydrogen from the oxygen, but that takes energy to do it. And then what you get is hydrogen that can be stored and to be used in another way for some applications. And so green hydrogen is when you use wind and solar to do the splitting. I think the wind and solar, we don't have that much of it yet. So let's put it right into the grid. And that's a more efficient use of it. I don't want to see wind and solar making hydrogen just because there are big hydrogen tax credits. The Inflation Reduction Act is a wonderful, wonderful thing that we should, I thank Joe Biden for every day. But there is a thing in there that gives tax credits to hydrogen development. And I just want to put, until Massachusetts has got a lot of offshore wind running, I just want that to go directly into the grid so it can run my heat pump and my electric car and all that kind of stuff. And now there will be cases in the future where you can't electrify everything quite so easily, particularly industrial processes, or maybe long distance transportation, very long distance. I mean, there are some cases where hydrogen might be able to come in. We'll need hydrogen as a source, but we'll want it to be green. But it's not. I don't think it's going to be as dominant early as some people think. It's getting a lot of play in the news and in business circles, primarily because of the tax credits. I think the Inflation Reduction Act was a little too generous on hydrogen.
Yeah, and on carbon capture.
Yes, but that was needed. I'm not blaming Joe Biden. I'm blaming the other Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who
Right.
insisted in order to get the whole package, we had to accept some stuff that didn't make sense.
Right. So you mentioned supply chain issues. So is that affecting the ability for our transformers? Where is the supply chain issues, and how is that holding up our transition?
So I am told, and I think we'll hear more about it when the utilities are trying to get their electric sector modernization plans approved by the DPU, that there are backlogs if you want to buy the components of a substation, or even in the neighborhood level, if you want to buy a transformer. I think the price has gone up and it's not that the materials are so much necessarily short supply, but demand is outstripping manufacture, and all over the world. We're competing with China for these things, which is growing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm hearing it's if nothing else, it's causing delays. And so and I think that will come up more in the interconnection discussion, which is why can't the utilities upgrade faster than they have been? And so we'll keep hearing about that. So I do think it's a factor.
So in considering changes to the CES, is the DEP recommending any changes to the current requirements for municipal light plants? I know there are some people here from communities that have, Lexington doesn't, but a few of our surrounding communities do. Is there anything addressing municipal light plants?
So there's about 40 municipal light plants, and they have banded together politically to be largely exempt from the regulations that we impose on Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil. A couple of years ago, legislation was passed that sort of upped the ante on their requirements to meet some clean energy goals, but they're nothing to compare to what National Grid and Eversource have to do according to state law. It's a joke. I think it's a scandal. The Mass Climate Action Network has done some really good reporting on how much less energy those municipal utilities save compared to what we do with Mass Save, and how much less wind and solar is being consumed compared to what we have because of the clean energy standard. Having said that, I'm willing to bet there are people from Concord on this call. Concord is exemplary, and it is, I think, if you stack it up, is probably doing better than Eversource and National Grid. Again, voluntarily, they've taken control, and the town meeting, I think, is required that. So God bless them for that. Belmont is very strong, and there might be one or two others that are good, but for the most part, they're horrible.
Okay. So, uh, we have an advocacy committee and we meet weekly, and we know there's there's a hearing on Thursday, and there are a couple of grid oriented pieces of legislation there. Do you have any comment on one is Barrett's bill, and I forget who the other one is, on any of these pieces, and on whether we should really speak up about them because they're going to help us get to where we need to go?
So we have a lobbyist, Carrie Catan, and she's going to attend and going to listen a little bit more. We want to learn a little bit more about some of the bills that are being heard on Thursday. There's one bill in particular that is very well intended by Senator Barrett. Might be the one you're referring to. That once he's suggesting that the DPU approve a new rate structure that would be more friendly to somebody who has heat pumps or electric cars. It's kind of directed at that, which is you can play with. There's two. If you look at your bill, you pay a monthly charge for your electricity. If you use 0 kilowatt hours in the month, you would still pay a certain fixed amount, and then you pay a certain charge per kilowatt hour. And so the more energy you use, the more you pay. And he's sort of suggesting that if you have an electric car or an EV, maybe it makes sense to have a slightly larger cost um, um, uh, fixed charge and a lower price per kilowatt hour so that we don't discourage people from increasing their electricity load, right? We do want to increase electrification. And so that's the gist of what his bill's all about. And our view is that's generally in the right direction. I'm not sure that the bill language is just right. There's a lot of talk on Beacon Hill, particularly with Governor Healy's people, about really having the DPU look at rates all over a little bit more comprehensively to try to both make them better for electrification, but also trying to change them so that there's some social equity there, because it's the energy burden on low income people is pretty high. So I just think it requires a lot. It requires a lot of analysis, I think, before we jump at a new rate.
Okay. I just want to point out, in case people didn't notice this, Mark Sandine made a really interesting comment in the chat, and when Mark says something, I believe it. We have enough electricity in the electric cars in Lexington, we're the leader in the state right now, to power all the houses in Lexington for 8 hours. That's pretty amazing when you consider we may have a lot of electric cars, but we don't all have electric cars. So that just speaks to this possibility of our cars becoming our batteries. And once we can get that going, how much it can add to our grid's capability.
That's right. He's, as usual, Mark Sandine is right.
So okay, here's another one. Please say something about fossil fuels versus electric resistance as backup for heat pumps. Now that's assuming that we need a backup for our heat pumps, but
Yeah,
oh,
Cindy Aaron's just
yeah,
put
Cindy just answered that question. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so these days, in fact, Mass Save has now made it a requirement. If you go to Full House, you want that $10,000 Full House rebate for changing your whole house. You have to either get rid of your fossil fuel or at least disconnect it. So
Yeah. So
I'm not sure I agree with that right just yet, because we don't want to take the incentives off of people to do it. I think they jumped the gun on it, but that's my personal opinion.
I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of a moderate on that whole question, which is I agree that whole house heat pumps can keep somebody nice and warm in the winter. But you know, the reality is we're not we're not installing heat pumps in Massachusetts at a fast enough rate right now. It's a lot of work to encourage somebody to make that investment and to get rid of what they know. And we I think for the next couple of years, I think we want to be a little bit more flexible. Maybe we want people to install heat pumps and displace as much fossil fuel as possible. And so I'm not I am pretty purist on a lot of things and adamant about a lot of things. Not as much on that one because you know it's uh, uh, I think what is brilliant though is when a community does fossil fuel free new construction, as an example. That we need to stop the gas system from expanding. No question about that.
Yes, we are very excited, as are the other communities. And as you probably know, there's also a bill in the State House that any community that wants to go fossil fuel free can choose that for themselves.
Actually, we're working with the advocates for that bill and so many others on a thing called the Massachusetts Clean Heat Platform. And if you go to our website, you can find that, or you can Google Massachusetts Clean Heat Platform. And what we worked together on was we identified a half a dozen different building decarbonization bills, and that is one of them, which is every community that wants to go fossil fuel free ought to be able to.
Yeah, good. And Cindy, good comment that if they're starting to phase out rebates for the gas systems and other, you know, they're starting to focus more on heat pumps, and that's a good thing. So I feel like I've covered most of the questions that were brought up, but at this point, if anybody feels they have we have 8 minutes left before we're gonna let Larry get back to his life. If anybody has a specific question they don't feel was answered, raise your hand and we can take a couple of questions that way.
I want to thank Andy, just put into the chat the link to the Massachusetts Clean Heat Platform.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Mark, I see you turned your
I think
your-
Larry should say something about his Drive Green program.
Oh, thank you, Mark. A few years ago, I wanted to buy an electric car, so I did some research to see whether or not it was ready. It was 2014, and I, got myself a Chevy Volt, and I was sort of the guinea pig, which is like, well, if I can justify it for myself, should it be something the organization develops? And so I happened to hire somebody. I didn't realize how awesome she was, Anna Vanderspeck, and she created the Drive Green program. Go to our website, greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen. I just think it's the most practical, user-friendly web page for someone thinking about driving, getting an electric car. I think she's the most persuasive, informative person on electric cars in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So she's got a couple staff who work with her, but take a look at that. Don't buy an electric car without at least looking at what we have there for advice for you.
That's great to remind us about that. Lexington is hoping to do a Drive Green program in the spring, which we've done before. What we want to do is allow people to test drive. We did have an energy fair, and we did have people bring their own cars, and then people can ask questions. But I think the thing people wanted to do was be able to drive one and get and honestly, when you drive an electric car, you feel like I must have this. So, yeah, we will be in touch with Anna about that. She's been with you for a long time at this point, and she's quite good.
And
yeah, we had her as an intern and said, we got to hire this person. And now every morning I figure out how I can keep her.
And I would say there's 4 or 5 people on this call who bought a car and saved $4,000 or $5,000 because of Larry's program.
Thank you.
Well,
On this
good.
program.
Yes, well, we will bring it back to Lexington in the spring. So Larry, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, all of, it sounds like your team spends a lot of time reading, researching, getting the background that we all don't have the time to do. And we appreciate that you not only do that work at Green Energy Consumer Alliance, but that you're willing to come and share it with us so freely. So big round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody who showed up tonight. If you have any questions that weren't answered, just send them to LexCAN and we'll shoot them over to Larry. But we appreciate you attending tonight, and have a good rest of your evening.
Have a good night, everybody. I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. Good night.